Hello my friends, my name is Artur Rehi and I am an Estonian YouTuber. I heard a story once, it was a very interesting story about history. First World War, Germans and English, right? They're on the opposite side of the trenches and suddenly Christmas arrives and they get out of the trenches and play football. Real or fake? Real. And I found a video about it. How crazy is this? This story is real. I mean, could you imagine this happening in the Second World War? Like the Nazis versus the Red Army and suddenly they get out of the trenches in Stalingrad and play football together. No, this is a big no-no. This doesn't happen in war. So this is a very unique situation and I want to know all about it. Let's go.
The Christmas truce is one of the most poignant events of the First World War. A time when men rose up above the madness of the conflict and for just a moment saw each other as fellow humans. This is an event that definitely did happen. Thousands of men laid down arms in the truce, but a century of retellings has also kind of sanded down its rough edges and oversimplified its messy reality. Indeed, this event wasn't just the result of pure human spirit and holiday cheer. It was a host of unique factors that drove these enemies to spontaneously declare peace in no man's land. And really, it may not have been all that spontaneous. Small armistices were happening every day. As frontline troops became accustomed to the rhythms of trench warfare, they learned that looking the other way now and then could bring a shred of safety and calm to their lives. The armies ate meals at the same time, which became a daily ceasefire. Patrols frequently—
Armies eat meals at the same— How weird is that? Two sides don't settle on this. You don't have rules. You're at war. But you eat at the same time, and you probably believe in the same God. I mean, they all were Christians, I'm pretty sure, back then. So why are they fighting? It's the weirdest thing. You're eating, the other side is eating, you're enjoying your meal. No one wants to disturb the peace because everyone likes peace. Why are you fighting?
Frequently ignored each other, adopting a live and let live attitude. Troops often shouted to each other across the lines. After all, the autumn battles had passed, and both sides were waiting out the winter. In reality, the weather was the primary enemy for both sides. The high water table at Flanders meant that the trenches were always filling with water, sometimes collapsing and burying men inside. Soldiers leaned against the walls to sleep, trying to keep themselves out of the wet. Food supplies had to be hung up on dugout ceilings. And that winter had been particularly miserable. Weeks of rain flooded the dugouts. The mud pulled men down.
Okay, I've been in the army. The worst freaking thing is rain. It's the most horrible thing. You can have snow, you can have cold, but if you have a warm weather, but it rains, it's still horrible. If it's cold and it rains, it's even more horrible. But rain is like your worst enemy in the forest, because you can't protect yourself from it. Even if you wear the protective suit against rain, it's still moist. And if it goes on for a long time, your morale will just go straight down. Be aware of the rain, my children.
Like quicksand. Now, British Field Marshal Sir John French had noticed the hands-off—
Wait. British Field Marshal was named Sir John French. French. It's a bit weird. It should be a French Field Marshal. Oh no, the French Field Marshal is called Louis Breton. British.
Attitude his men were developing towards the enemy, and so he ordered attacks in late December to boost morale. And this resulted in heavy British losses.
Oof.
Concerned about possible fraternization over the holiday, he issued orders that no unofficial armistice would be tolerated. Morale was much better over in the German trenches. After all, they were winning. But many men were also experiencing their first holiday away from home. Knowing that this would be difficult, commanders brought Christmas to the trenches, shipping thousands of presents to the field. Each man received a gift from the Kaiser, cigar boxes for NCOs, a pipe with the Crown Prince on it for the ranks. The British, for their part, received a brass box from Princess Mary filled with cigarettes, tobacco, a Christmas card, and sweets.
I wish Princess Mary would send me some cigarettes and sweets. Where are you, Princess Mary, when I need you? And where are you, Kaiser? I could taste a cigar.
And then there were personal packages. Enterprises sprang up on the home front, offering family members a chance to send gift boxes to the troops. British soldiers received plum puddings and 1,000-count boxes of cigarettes. German and Austrian troops were bombarded with chocolate and salami and cognac. Both sides received winter clothing. In truth, though, the gifts were kind of a nuisance. I mean, there was nowhere to put it all. Soldiers didn't have a place to store 1,000 extra cigarettes. But that Christmas Eve delivered a true gift. The rain stopped, and the trenches drained. Dry cold froze the mud into a hard surface, almost like a floor. Snow dusted the countryside. That afternoon, the gunfire dwindled, and...
I mean, it's a beautiful day to smoke 1,000 cigarettes in one day. Just perfect situation.
In some sectors, it stopped entirely. The weather just seemed too nice for it. The Germans, stuffed with Christmas chocolate and cheered by the weather, started putting lit Tannenbaum up on their trench parapets. And then, the German line started singing. Over on the British parapets, watchmen of the Scots Guard saw lines of lights along the enemy trench. At first, they suspected an attack, but then they heard an ethereal sound drifting across no man's land. Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. The original Austrian version of Silent Night. Sensing a challenge, Guards Officer Lieutenant Sir Edward Holt...
Sensing a challenge? Everything has to be a challenge. If the other side is singing, we will be singing. Sing back!
Decided that they should drown this out with their own carol. The sides went back and forth, but soon the competition merged into a harmony of Good King Wenceslas and Auld Lang Syne. The men began shouting Christmas greetings across the line, jokingly at first. A few even stepped out to talk. Hulse didn't know it, but the same thing was happening up and down the entire British line. Agreements formed. In some sectors, the officers met at the wire and shook hands, agreeing to cease hostilities the next day. In other areas, the ranks took the lead, Germans shouting across no man's land, "English, tomorrow if you no shoot, we no shoot." At times, it was just one brave soul walking into no man's land waving a newspaper. These overtures were extremely dangerous.
This is so sweet, oh my god, this brings out the best in humanity.
Though peace was breaking out in certain areas, it didn't happen everywhere. One British regiment responded to German caroling with a machine gun blast. Some unarmed soldiers were gunned down trying to broker this holiday armistice. But in most sectors, the ceasefire held. This truce mostly happened between German and British units. The French and the Belgians, whose countries were under German occupation, were less inclined. There were agreements to bury the dead and cease hostilities, but not as much fraternization. Yet a Bavarian unit held fire during a French mass, and both sides halted fighting long enough for a guest, a soloist from the Paris Opera, to make a performance. British Indian troops, who were a bit unfamiliar with this whole Christmas deal, saw the lit German trees and thought of their own holiday of Diwali. They held fire, but also held position, until some Germans tempted them out of the trenches with cigars and cigarettes. Soon
some Germans tempted them out of the trenches with some cigarettes. If you're a Hindi, if you're British, French, doesn't matter. If a German comes to you with cigarettes and cigars, you will go out and smoke one with them.
The men were smoking together on the parapet. That Christmas night, the troops slept in sublime quiet. Christmas Day dawned, bright and cold.
I love this.
The sky clear for the first time in weeks. To their shock, British troops looked across no man's land to see the Germans walking around on their parapets. Such a thing was suicidal in daylight, and that gesture of trust, more than anything, lured a few British out. It was heaven to at last stand up straight and walk on solid earth. Some had ventured into no man's land on Christmas Eve, but in daylight it was impossible to ignore the bodies lying between the trenches. The two sides buried their dead in common graves, grieving side by side in joint services, listening to the far...
It's getting me emotional, damn. Common graves. I mean, these people didn't know why they're fighting for it. They didn't want to kill each other. It's the war of the grandchildren, you know. The Kaisers and the kings, and they were warring each other. These people, they didn't know why they were fighting. They wanted to go home.
Faraway sounds of battle from other sectors. And that shared experience broke down the wall. Soldiers milled about together in no man's land, swapping overabundant gifts from home. British beef for uniform buttons, chocolate cake for barrels of beer. They exchanged hats. One German barber gave haircuts. The men chatted. After all, they shared so much in common. They lived in the same fields under the same rain, and they...
Yeah, think about it. 2 million on one side, 2 million on the other side. They're on the opposite side, but they have shared everything in the past 2 years. Death, injuries, loss of friends, lack of food, pain, sicknesses. They share all of it, yet they're on these different sides. If they would get together, there's no difference between them because they share the lifestyle. I mean, it's so easy for this to happen actually, yet so impossible.
They were equally sick of war. Besides, they were curious. What was life like on the other side? Who were these enemies? One British officer was perplexed to learn that his new German friend believed the armies of the Kaiser fought for freedom. That was impossible, the officer responded. We're fighting for freedom. Amid this, Lieutenant Hulse found himself talking to Lieutenant Thomas of the 15th Westphalians, who had something to pass on, a Victoria Cross and a packet of letters. An English officer had died in the German trench during the last attack. Perhaps he could give these to the man's family? Touched, Hulse removed his own silk scarf, a gift from home, and presented it in thanks. Thomas, embarrassed that he had nothing to give in return, sent a soldier to fetch the fur gloves that his family had sent. Up and down the line, men started bringing out footballs. Kickabouts broke out, with men from both sides chasing the ball among shell holes and sliding on the frozen ground. In one sector, a group of Highlanders challenged a Saxon regiment, who burst out laughing whenever a kilt flew up during play. But not all of this activity was goodwill. On both sides, a few used the gatherings to reconnoiter enemy trenches, and both sides used the time to repair dugouts. Of course, for some, this fraternization appeared false. One British soldier flashed his squadmate a hidden dagger, while another refused to smoke German cigarettes, fearing that they might be poisoned. When one squad of Bavarians discussed whether to meet the British, their corporal snapped at them. "Such a thing should not happen in wartime. Have you no German sense of honor left at all?" They weren't surprised. The night before, the same soldier had refused to join the unit's Christmas service. Corporal Hitler was odd like that, but his disapproval...
Corporal Hitler. This is getting me emotional. It's hard to watch this. This is war, which brings out the worst in people, but this brought out the best in people. War has infinite potential to do everything. It's horrible, but it's such a weird thing that this can happen in the most horrible times in history.
Reflected the general's view. This was exactly the situation that Field Marshal French had feared. Commanders dispatched senior officers to threaten disciplinary action and insist that the men restart the war.
Yeah, because it's horrible. If your men can see the other side as humans, it's so hard to kill them. You have to show your men that the other side is animal, they're ruthless, they're the worst thing ever. You have to protect, they're pure evil. If your men see that they are humans also, they can empathize with them. You cannot kill something you feel alike with. So this is horrible for the ranks. I mean, for the higher ranks, this should not happen because you cannot war like this. You cannot war if you don't hate the other side.
In some sectors, the armistice came to an orderly close. Officers from both sides saluted and fired revolvers into the air, signaling that, all right, the war was back on. In a few places, troops resisted until nearly to New Year's Eve, but the generals would not have it. German command dispatched snipers to break the ceasefire. French ordered an artillery barrage, letting the machinery of war roll over the human connections of the frontline troops. Nothing like this Christmas truce would happen again. The generals wouldn't allow it. On Christmas Eve 1915, British officers ordered a 24-hour artillery barrage. Men who tried to form a truce were court-martialed. Machine guns drowned out German carols. But the generals needn't have bothered. The spirit of that truce was unique to 1914, a symptom of a young war. By Christmas 1915, those troops had experienced chlorine gas and creeping bombardments. Zeppelins were bombing London. The Battle of Verdun would end just before the holiday, leaving 750,000 casualties. Indeed, many of the men who celebrated in no man's land that day would never see another Christmas. One of those unlucky ones was Lieutenant Sir Edward Hulse, who had sung carols and given a German officer his silk scarf. He died 3 months later while trying to save a wounded comrade. He was 25. And yet, Hulse is not remembered today for his military achievements, or even the book of letters that his friends published after his death. He and so many others are remembered for a victory entirely their own, when a group of brave men ventured into the line of fire, trusting their enemies not to shoot, and believing that humanity was better than the bonfire it had built for itself.
I think this is the wrong time to watch this. I should have watched this as Christmas, but it's such a great video. It was back in the time when Extra Credits made videos like this. Now they don't make videos like this. But it's one of the best ones. And I love this, it says so much about people. War says so much about people, but this says the other side. War brings out the worst and the best. Got me all teared up. It's hard to watch this stuff. Hard to watch it, and especially knowing that high command does not want it to happen. This shows how corrupt our politics and how corrupt are the leaders of the country. People are not that corrupt. The power corrupts people. If you're just holding a rifle, you don't have any power, you're not corrupt. If you have men to command, you don't want this anymore. You're gonna command them to come back to the trenches and shoot the other side. Be aware of power, my children. Yeah, that's true. Anyway, my friends, thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, I make 3 videos a you, Monday, Wednesday and Friday, 3 times a week. The best way to support is Patreon, the link is in the description below. You can also support through PayPal. Everything helps me to continue making these videos. You know, if I don't have to work that much. More time for me to make videos for you. And as always, my friends, until my next video, stay cool and bye bye.